Hey, everybody. I'm Chris Metzler, one of the programmers here at SF DocFest. As you might have heard, we're celebrating 23 years of bringing some of the most cool, irreverent, and just unusual documentaries from around the world to here in San Francisco. I still remember my first SF DocFest I ever attended. It was in a empty church in downtown San Francisco, and it just had some of the most interesting films there. And so I've been kind of excited about programming here for the last 10 years. And it was neat when we ran across this really wonderful documentary, who is Michael Jang, in our submissions, and it's one of our opening night films. And we're lucky enough to have director Mike Jacobs here. Welcome, Mike.
Thanks for having me, Chris.
So I imagine a lot of people in the audience are wondering, like, how did you kind of decide to go down this rabbit hole of a documentary? How did you know there was a story there you wanted to tell?
Sure. Yeah. So I met Michael Jang probably 10 years ago at Pop-Up Magazine. Pop-Up Magazine was like a live magazine show, a curated magazine show. And he was presenting a series of his photographs from his summer weather series, which was a series of photographs he took in the late 80s, early 90s. All these want to be weathermen and women came in to try to be contestants to find out if they could get selected to be weathermen for KTVU, I think it is, Channel 2. And he was hired to just shoot these headshots one after the next. And he told this really engaging story about these photographs, and the photographs themselves were just captivating. And I found Michael's personality really engaging, and I was surprised I was unfamiliar with him. I've lived in San Francisco since the mid 2000s, and here was an artist with a body of work that I was unfamiliar with, and with a really engaging personality. And so I just started, I got to know him that night a little bit, and started to explore more and more of his archive. And the more and more I looked into his archive, the more compelled I was to try to figure out who this guy was, and maybe if there was a film there. And once I sat down to talk with him maybe 2.5 years ago, I just knew that there was an opportunity to explore a documentary.
And how did he feel about this kind of idea? I mean, given that he's often he's the person often behind the camera, how did that kind of discussion take place? And
Yeah, great question. I mean, it was very challenging for us to kind of get on the same page about, what ultimately my intentions were, what he was going to be comfortable with, what was going to be inbounds and out of bounds as far as what we could record, how much archival material. And when I say archival, how much of his vintage prints was he comfortable giving us? And then how much of his personal life was he comfortable opening up? I found him really available and willing to participate at the outset. But that's only gets you so far, right? As filmmakers, we want to make sure that there's an opportunity to dive pretty deep, right? And to explore the range of a life. And so it took a while to figure out where I could pry for more information, storytelling. It took a while for us to sort of come to a comfortable place with sharing, material, right? Making sure that he felt good about what he was sending me and how it was going to be used. Because yeah, to your point, Chris, he's used to being in controls. He's used to being the person behind the camera. So I think it just took a while for him to get used to me. But once he saw me at work, and once he saw my crews on set, he very quickly understood that, like, we're going about this the right way. We're going about this thoughtfully. We want to tell a great story. And in order to tell a great story, he really needs to be comfortable with being vulnerable about opening up and sharing his life.
yeah, well, I think there's a lot of great subtext in the film. And I guess the other kind of question to pair with it is also aesthetics. So when you started out, did you know visually how you wanted to kind of shape the story, and how much of that was shaped by, Michael's own approach to photography and art, and how much of it was like how you wanted to kind of approach the story?
Yeah, it was a little bit of both, right? Like, you can't make a film about Michael Jang and have it be conventional, right? We knew at the outset of this project that whatever we do has got to be unconventional from a visual aesthetic. And now there are limits to that, right? Because we don't have, unlimited resources, and we don't have, unlimited time. So we still have to make choices based on the budget and based on the schedule and based on the subject's availability, both him and the other interviewees that we wanted to capture. But from an image capture standpoint, we really did a lot of testing and a lot of thoughtful exploration with the director of photography, Tyler McFerrin. He lives over in the East Bay, and I've worked with him off and on for a couple of years here in the Bay Area. And he's such a great collaborator. And we really tried to come up with a visual language that we felt like was complementary to Michael and his work, but was still something that we could really kind of own, control, and replicate throughout the course of production. So that meant shooting a sit-down interview with Michael a very specific way, and then shooting all the other interviews with other subjects a different way. And we chose to shoot those in black and white. We chose to change the aspect ratio of the frame, and we did that for a couple reasons. I mean, number one, we wanted to sort of politely nod to Michael's still photographs from his, era of the 1970s and 80s that he was shooting with his Leica. And we also just felt like black and white would have sort of a timelessness quality to our storytelling that I think would also be nice to come in and out of archival with. And just be a very interesting aesthetic for a film about a photographer, a still photographer. And then we also wanted to shoot film. And so we decided that 16 would be the happy medium between what we could afford and a film gauge that would hold up and be rich with color. And that would also allow us to kind of transport through time and place, because, so much of Michael's photographs were taken in the 70s and into the 80s and a little bit into the 90s. And so we wanted an opportunity for us to transition as sort of seamlessly as possible between these different eras. And so shooting 16 millimeter gave us kind of it's a little gimmicky in documentary, right, when we use these film stocks, but in this case we felt like it was a little more earned as far as pairing with our storytelling, because we wanted audiences to come in and out of these different time periods when he took these photographs, and come out of them again as sort of cohesively as possible. So it felt all really connected to the storytelling core with our visual language.
Yeah, it has a cool texture to it all. It kind of matches a lot of his, art. It's interesting you mentioned that when you met Michael at Pop-Up Magazine, you hadn't kind of been familiar with his work. And to be honest, like I hadn't been aware of his work either until I ran across your film and submission.
Okay. Yeah.
And as I've been kind of telling people about, different films in the program, it's been kind of interesting one where there's like some people that are like really keyed on him. Like, wait, you have a movie about Michael, and then other people are like, wait, who? I'm like, well, this is why it's really great. Why do you think that he's been such kind of a hidden gem in the Bay Area? And like, what are some of the communities that are kind of most familiar with it? And for those that are now going to get a chance to discover some of his work through the film, what do you think they might be most surprised by?
Well, what you just said, Chris, is exactly what originally motivated me to go make this documentary. Was that when I started asking people, this is, 2 years ago at the outset of the project, when I started asking people from the filmmaking community or the fine art community, or just people I've known in the Bay Area for, living and working here for the past 15 plus years, when I asked them about Michael Jang, I got that same answer. Either they had never heard of them or they were passionately convinced that he was an underappreciated artist. So right there, it's like, that's an opportunity to make a film. And so really, that sort of journey of discovery for the audience, my hope is that even people who know him learn something new about him in this film. And I think that they will, because I think there are things he reveals about himself or about his family life that people just perhaps aren't as familiar with. And then the people that don't know him, this is a great introduction to, an underappreciated artist. And I think that journey of discovery, I hope in this film, can service that curiosity. I don't know why I think for a couple of reasons, right? We go into it in the film, right? But like he, stepped away from his commitment to making art when he was in his 30s and started his family. And he had a thriving career as a portrait photographer. And so he was able to, he set aside his fine art, photography work and just went, into this commercial portrait work in order to make a living and support his family. He didn't really look at himself as an artist until he was in his 50s.
Mm.
And so I think that's part of the reason why, is that he wasn't out there advocating, and there wasn't anybody advocating for him soon after he took most of these photographs that are now collected, by collectors and are in museums. So, I think that's one reason why. And then another reason why is, as his photographs have gotten more and more appreciation at museums, I think it just takes a little while, for photographers to stay in the zeitgeist, continue to get shows, because it's interesting. He's a living and working artist, but he's not making photographs anymore. His artwork right now is actually in the street, and, by design. Right. And so if you want to see Michael Jang's art today, we have to walk around the streets of San Francisco, or better yet, follow him on Instagram, and then try to figure out where he's doing this graffiti work, right? And there you can see his art. Otherwise, you have to go to museums, or the occasional gallery show that features his work. So he's still not out there in the way that some other contemporaries of his generation are. I hope that changes. I hope he gets a big, show at a museum soon. But this film kind of looks at that, looks at why certain artists, are maybe, in his case, I would argue he was just way ahead of his time, but it remains to be seen.
That's cool. Well, and I mean, I know one of the things that, particularly with photography, right, is that, there's been that kind of like, slower curve towards, just how photography is seen as an art, in more recent decades. And,
Especially a lot of his street photography. I mean, that's a great point too. And sorry to cut you off, but like, if so much of his work that's being appreciated now is street photography, there's images of his family that are so distinctively unique because they capture that assimilated American immigrant experience that people haven't seen before, but they're still snapshots, right? They aren't these, designed portraits where he brought in props and was doing a bunch of lighting technique. It was really these snapshots of his own, family members, from the 1980s in Pacifica. And so I think it's just taken a little bit of time for American institutions, art institutions, to appreciate that work and to seek that work out. Because when that work was made, there wasn't that type of photography in museums from, an Asian family, an Asian American family. And so I think it's also just taken a little bit of time for institutions to also catch up, for wanting to make sure that they show artwork from that time period within those different communities.
Yeah, most definitely. When you kind of embarked on making this film, was there kind of anything once you started to dig in that like most surprised you, or was kind of like your biggest challenge in trying to make it the kind of your vision on screen?
Yeah. The big challenge was working with a living artist. I have never made a film, with a living artist before. And for good reasons. Artists are very particular about the way that, they have to, let go of control and how they're going to be perceived, and I can understand that. In this case, he's opening up his life to me and sharing things about himself that he hasn't shared before. Any kind of documentary, gets into some of these like sort of thorny ethics about subject and filmmaker relationship and responsibility. And while Michael and I always had a very good dialogue about that, it wasn't necessarily easy, just as far as how we went about things. So it was just challenging to make sure that I could protect what I needed to protect as far as the film I wanted to make and the story I wanted to bring to life, while also needing to be respectful of his desire to understand what I was doing and how I was, potentially manipulating time and place in order to tell the best story I could in the 45 minutes that we tell it, And so he's also sharing images with me that, again, are collected in museums and have a fine art appreciators around the world. And so it was a responsibility that I had to make sure that we did that with craft and with compassion, while still advocating for narrative storytelling and character, and getting that mix right with somebody who I admire as a person, who I need their help in order to like finish the film, because they have to give me photographs, and yet don't want to give control to, because it's a documentary that we're in charge of making. It's a really tricky balance. So I think I've made put it this way, I've made films about more controversial subjects and subject matter than this, and yet this was more difficult in navigating, the nuances of working with an artist.
Yeah. Well, it's a really wonderful film, and really appreciate you guys sharing it with us here at SF Doc Fest. One of the things I always try to remind our audience is that we're lucky enough that filmmakers like you get a chance to share your films with us at film festivals very early on in its life cycle. In fact, this is its world premiere, and so you know our responsibility as an audience is to kind of go out there and be your grassroots street team, of kind of like helping spread the word. So, what are ways that people can continue to kind of follow, the film and your career, but also how to kind of shout it out on social media or let people know about this really great film you've made?
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate that. I mean, we're grateful for the opportunity to premiere at DocFest. Much like you, Chris, I've been a fan of the festival since I moved to San Francisco, and it's always been a curated group of films that I've always been surprised by in great ways. Right? It always has film selections that are a little bit outside the mainstream and are always driven by art and driven by a celebration of the range of human life and all of its manifestations. And so I've always really appreciated the programming. So it's an honor to premiere with the festival. And I think from here, probably the easiest way that people can shout us out is through Instagram and social feeds. Michael Jang's Instagram feed is one of the more entertaining social feeds across, at least across my social networks. And, he's a great place that so much of our, we're releasing little film clips through his social feed, and a lot of the film's life cycle is going to go through there and through my production company, Strike Anywhere Films. So, shout us out, Strike Anywhere Films, shout out Michael Jang, and, when and where possible. And then if we do additional screenings in San Francisco, if we're lucky enough to do that, we'll just be, blasting it out again. And then eventually we'll be on television on Independent Lens in the 2024-2025 Independent Lens season. We don't have a firm date yet for that broadcast, but it will eventually be broadcast for free on public television.
Very cool. Well, congratulations on the film. Please extend our congratulations to the rest of the team and Michael, and really appreciate you sharing your film with us.
All right. Thanks, Chris. Appreciate it.
Cool. Thanks.